Welcome to Mythos AI, your source for Cliff's Notes on complex subjects. Join Anna and Phil for yet another engaging conversation.
Welcome back. Today we're embarking on a deep dive that compares two seemingly disparate historical periods, but they're connected by one unsettling commonality: the appeasement of aggressors. We'll begin by carefully examining the events that ultimately led to the 1938 Munich Agreement.
Yes.
We'll take apart the motivations of the major players involved and explore why this agreement has become such a cautionary tale in the realm of diplomacy.
Right.
Then we'll shift gears and we'll fast forward to a hypothetical scenario. A 2025 peace initiative that's aimed at resolving the conflicts currently raging in Ukraine.
Okay.
A proposal that bears some rather unsettling similarities to the concessions that were made in Munich.
I see.
Our goal today is to uncover whether history is indeed repeating itself.
Right.
And if so, what lessons can we actually glean from these echoes of appeasement?
To fully grasp the weight of the Munich Agreement and its potential parallels to the present day, we need to first kind of travel back in time
Okay.
to the very turbulent landscape of pre-World War II Europe. Europe was struggling to recover from the devastation of the First World War. Economies were in shambles, societies were fractured, and the scars, both physical and psychological, of the Great War lingered.
Right.
This widespread exhaustion, compounded by the economic hardships of the Great Depression, fostered a deep aversion to conflict.
Yeah.
And this sentiment really permeated the political discourse at the time.
This deep yearning for peace, while completely understandable, led to a string of miscalculations and misinterpretations of Germany's intentions under Adolf Hitler.
Yes.
Many in the West, especially in Britain and France, viewed Hitler's rearmament and his expansionist rhetoric as mere posturing, almost like a negotiating tactic,
Yes.
rather than a genuine sign of things to come.
Right.
This misreading was made worse by a reliance on outdated military strategies.
Yes.
Many were still clinging to the methods of trench warfare that had defined World War I, failing to grasp the revolutionary potential of mechanized warfare which Germany was rapidly developing.
The isolationist stance of the United States further complicated matters.
Right.
The U.S., while it had somewhat modernized its military, remained reluctant to engage in European security issues.
Right.
This perception of American disengagement, along with the internal struggles and economic woes plaguing Europe, created an environment ripe for appeasement. Despite its inherent risks, it seemed like the most palatable option at the time. It was a dangerous gamble.
Yes.
One based on the hope that concessions could somehow satisfy Hitler's ambitions and avert a catastrophic war.
And this brings us to the fateful events of September 1938,
Yes.
which culminated in the signing of the Munich Agreement.
Right.
This agreement, negotiated between Germany, Britain, France, and Italy, allowed Nazi Germany to annex the Sudetenland. This is a region of Czechoslovakia with a substantial German population. And importantly, Czechoslovakia itself was completely excluded from these negotiations.
Right.
It really highlights the stark power imbalances and the blatant disregard for the sovereignty of smaller nations.
Absolutely.
The agreement was really born from a complex web of factors.
Yes.
But the most significant was the overwhelming desire to avoid war at any cost.
The memory of World War I, the sheer scale of loss of life,
Right.
the economic ruin, the societal trauma, all of these weighed very heavily on the minds of European leaders. They were determined to prevent a repeat of such carnage, even if it meant making concessions that many viewed as morally indefensible.
Yes.
This desperation for peace led them to make a fatally flawed assumption that Hitler's ambition could be appeased through negotiation and territorial concessions.
Right.
The belief, however misguided, was that by giving Hitler what he wanted in the Sudetenland, they could essentially satisfy his hunger for expansion and thereby preserve peace in Europe.
And as history tragically showed, this appeasement was a grave miscalculation.
Yes.
Rather than satisfying Hitler's ambition, it only emboldened him.
Yep.
It reinforced his belief that the Western powers were weak and divided,
Right.
unwilling to risk war to defend their own interests or the sovereignty of their allies. This perception of weakness further emboldened Hitler, giving him the confidence to push forward with his expansionist plans, ultimately leading to the outbreak of World War II just a year later.
Right.
The Munich Agreement stands as a stark reminder of the dangers of appeasement. demonstrating how concessions made to prevent conflict can actually pave the way for even greater bloodshed.
To truly understand how this disastrous outcome unfolded, we need to examine the motivations and the miscalculations of each key player involved in the Munich Agreement.
Right.
We should begin with Adolf Hitler. His objectives were rooted in a potent mix of nationalist zeal, historical revisionism, and a very dangerous ideology of racial superiority. He believed in the concept of Lebensraum, meaning living space, which he aimed to acquire through the conquest and subjugation of neighboring territories.
Right.
The annexation of the Sudetenland with its large ethnic German population was a crucial step towards achieving his vision. He skillfully exploited the anxieties and the divisions within Europe, leveraging the West's desire for peace against them.
On the other side of the negotiating table, you had Neville Chamberlain,
Yes.
the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom.
Right.
Chamberlain, deeply scarred by the horrors of World War I, was a staunch advocate for peace. And he saw appeasement as the only viable path to achieve it.
Yes.
His infamous declaration upon returning from Munich, "Peace for our time," encapsulated this deep desire to avert war, a hope that would soon be shattered by Hitler's insatiable ambition.
France, led by Edouard Daladier, found itself in a very precarious position.
Right.
Still recovering from World War I, they lacked the military might and the political will to confront Germany head-on.
Right.
But at the same time, they felt obligated to honor their commitment to their ally, Czechoslovakia. Caught between these conflicting pressures, Daladier ultimately chose the path of appeasement, endorsing the Munich Agreement in a desperate attempt to avert another war.
Italy, under the rule of Benito Mussolini, played a more opportunistic role in this whole Munich crisis.
Absolutely.
While presenting himself outwardly as a mediator, Mussolini's true motives were to strengthen his alliance with Hitler and bolster Italy's standing in the evolving power dynamics of Europe.
Yes.
He saw the Munich Agreement as a chance to align himself with what he perceived to be the rising power in Europe, Germany, and to potentially secure concessions that would benefit Italy's position on the continent.
Finally, we come to Czechoslovakia, the true victim in this whole ordeal.
Yes.
Excluded from the negotiations that determined its fate, Czechoslovakia was forced to accept a settlement that fundamentally compromised its sovereignty and territorial integrity.
Right.
The annexation of the Sudetenland not only weakened Czechoslovakia militarily, but it also dealt a severe blow to its national morale and its sense of self-determination. This event serves as a harsh reminder of the brutal realities of power politics, where the interests of smaller nations are often sacrificed for expediency and the pursuit of great power ambitions.
Absolutely.
The Munich Agreement stands as a powerful historical example, demonstrating how the desire for a quick resolution can overshadow the potential long-term consequences of appeasing an aggressor. This brings us to the current conflict in Ukraine, a situation where the echoes of Munich are unsettlingly clear.
Right.
To understand Ukraine's current predicament, we need to go back to a broken promise from the past.
Okay.
The 1991 Budapest Memorandum. In this agreement, Ukraine agreed to give up its nuclear arsenal.
Right.
It was the world's third largest at the time. In exchange, they received security assurances from Russia, the United States, and the United Kingdom.
Right.
These assurances were meant to guarantee Ukraine's territorial integrity and sovereignty. But they proved to be tragically insufficient when Russia annexed Crimea in 2014.
Yep.
This really exposed the fragility of international agreements and the limits of security guarantees when faced with raw power politics.
The West's response to the annexation of Crimea was widely criticized as being inadequate and hesitant.
Yes.
It primarily consisted of economic sanctions and diplomatic condemnations. It lacked the robust military support that many believed Ukraine was owed under the terms of the Budapest Memorandum.
Right.
Some argue that this tepid response emboldened Russia,
Yes.
signaling that further aggression might be met with similarly restrained resistance.
This perception of Western indecision, combined with Russia's strategic calculations and its own internal political dynamics,
Right.
set the stage for the full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, a move that dramatically escalated the conflict.
Yes.
And plunged Eastern Europe into a prolonged state of crisis.
While the West has provided some military aid to Ukraine and imposed stricter sanctions since the 2022 invasion, there's still been a reluctance to engage in direct military intervention,
Yes.
largely due to fears of escalating the conflict and potentially triggering a wider war involving nuclear powers.
Right.
This cautious approach is understandable given the stakes involved, but it's allowed Russia to solidify its hold on significant parts of Ukrainian territory,
Right.
raising concerns that the West might be falling into the trap of appeasement once again,
Yes.
prioritizing a short-term de-escalation over a long-term commitment to upholding international law and defending Ukraine's sovereignty.
Now, projecting forward to 2025, we encounter a hypothetical scenario, a peace initiative proposed by President Trump.
Okay.
This initiative, while presented as a path to ending the bloodshed and stabilizing the region, bears a striking resemblance to the appeasement strategy employed in the Munich Agreement. A key concern is the sidelining of Ukraine in these negotiations,
Right.
mirroring the exclusion of Czechoslovakia from the deliberations that sealed its fate back in 1938.
Yes.
This proposed plan essentially relegates Ukraine to a passive bystander in a process that will profoundly impact its future,
Right.
raising serious doubts about the legitimacy of any peace achieved through such a process.
The proposed peace plan calls for significant territorial concessions to Russia,
Yes.
essentially accepting the current military situation on the ground as the basis for a negotiated settlement.
Right.
Critics argue that this approach amounts to rewarding aggression and legitimizing Russia's illegal seizure of Ukrainian territory.
It sets a very dangerous precedent,
Right?
signaling to powerful nations that they can violate international law
Right.
and redraw borders by force with minimal repercussions. This not only undermines the international rules-based order, but it also emboldens other potential aggressors, possibly leading to a more unstable and conflict-prone world.
The parallels between the Munich Agreement and this hypothetical 2025 peace initiative go beyond just sidelining the victim and accepting territorial concessions.
Yeah.
They both highlight a willingness to prioritize a quick resolution, even if it comes at the expense of long-term security and the principles of international law.
Right.
In both cases, there's a gamble being made that appeasing the aggressor will lead to a lasting peace. A gamble that history suggests is incredibly risky.
While the desire for a quick end to the conflict is understandable,
Right.
given the immense human suffering and economic disruption,
Yes.
the potential consequences of sacrificing Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity for a potentially fragile and short-lived peace are incredibly concerning.
The motivations behind the United States' push for this hypothetical peace initiative are complex and multifaceted.
Right.
There's undoubtedly a genuine desire to end the conflict, a conflict that's caused immense human suffering and destabilized the global order. However, some worry that this desire for a quick resolution stems from a shift in American foreign policy priorities.
Yes.
A shift away from the multilateral, values-based approach that has traditionally defined American leadership in the world.
This shift is evident in the greater emphasis on direct engagement with aggressors,
Right.
often at the expense of alliances and international institutions. There's also a noticeable willingness to abandon long-standing commitments,
Right.
as seen in the potential disregard for the security assurances given to Ukraine under the Budapest Memorandum.
Domestic political and economic pressures are also playing a role in shaping the American response to the conflict in Ukraine.
Absolutely.
The conflict has contributed to global economic instability, disrupted supply chains, and driven up energy prices, creating political and economic challenges for Western governments.
Yes.
These domestic pressures, coupled with a sense of war weariness among some segments of the population and a desire to focus on internal challenges,
Right.
create an environment that's conducive to seeking a swift resolution, even if it involves compromises that undermine long-term strategic interests
Yes.
and erode America's credibility as a reliable ally and a defender of democracy.
The European response to the situation in Ukraine has been marked by hesitancy, internal divisions, and a prioritization of economic interests over security concerns.
Right.
Germany especially has faced criticism for its reluctance to take a stronger stance against Russia. This is largely due to their heavy reliance on Russian natural gas imports. Fearing the economic fallout from cutting these energy ties, Germany has been slow to implement tougher sanctions and provide strong military support to Ukraine,
Right.
a stance that's strained relations with other European partners,
Yes.
particularly those in Eastern Europe who feel most directly threatened by Russian aggression and view Germany's position as prioritizing its own economic interests over the collective security of the continent.
France, while more vocal in its condemnation of Russia's actions, has also shown some hesitation in taking decisive action.
Yes.
Its emphasis on diplomacy and a negotiated settlement is understandable. Given its traditional role as a diplomatic power and its desire to avoid a wider conflict.
Yes.
But this cautious approach has at times been seen as prioritizing appeasement over a firm commitment to defending Ukraine's sovereignty
Right.
and upholding international law. This cautious approach, coupled with Germany's economic vulnerabilities and the broader challenges of forging a unified European response, has limited the effectiveness of the European Union's efforts to counter Russian aggression
Yes.
and provide meaningful support to Ukraine. It's important to note, though, that not all European nations have embraced this cautious approach favored by Germany and France. Countries like Poland and the Baltic states, with their history of Russian domination and their acute awareness of Moscow's expansionist tendencies, have consistently pushed for a more robust and proactive response to Russian aggression.
Right.
They've been leading the charge in providing military aid to Ukraine, strengthening NATO's presence in Eastern Europe, and implementing stricter sanctions against Russia.
Yes.
Their stance really reflects a deeper understanding of the threat posed by Russia, a threat they see as existential given their geographic proximity and historical experiences, and a firm belief that appeasement only emboldens aggressors and ultimately invites more aggression.
These differing viewpoints within Europe really highlight the difficulties in formulating a cohesive and an effective response to the crisis in Ukraine.
Right.
These divisions stem from a complex mix of historical experiences, geopolitical calculations, economic dependencies, and just different perceptions of the threat. While some prioritize diplomacy and economic ties, others emphasize the need for a strong security posture and a willingness to confront aggression head-on, even if it means risking escalation.
Yes.
These internal disagreements hinder the European Union's ability to present a united front.
Right.
And to exert meaningful pressure on Russia, potentially undermining the effectiveness of sanctions, military aid, and diplomatic efforts aimed at resolving the conflict.
When we directly compare the Munich Agreement with this hypothetical 2025 peace initiative,
Yes.
a number of striking and concerning parallels emerge. Both involve the sidelining of the victim, treating them as pawns in a larger geopolitical game rather than as sovereign nations with the right to self-determination.
Right.
Both demonstrate a willingness to appease aggressors through territorial concessions,
Yes.
a strategy that history has repeatedly shown to be ineffective and often counterproductive.
This approach not only rewards aggression and encourages further violations of international law,
Right.
but it creates a moral hazard. It signals that powerful nations can act with impunity,
Yes.
while smaller nations are left to bear the consequences.
The common thread that runs through both the Munich Agreement and the 2025 Peace Initiative is this prioritization of short-term stability and expediency
Right.
over long-term security and the principles of international law and territorial integrity. In both instances, there's a calculated risk being taken, that a temporary peace achieved through concessions and appeasement is preferable to the risks and costs of confronting aggression directly.
Yes.
While this approach may seem appealing when faced with complex challenges and tough choices, it often sets the stage for future conflict.
Right.
By emboldening aggressors, by undermining international norms, and by creating a perception of weakness and indecision among those committed to upholding the international rules-based order.
The echoes of Munich serve as a stark warning about the dangers of repeating the mistakes of the past. Appeasement, often touted as a path to peace, rarely achieves its intended goal.
Right.
Instead, it emboldens aggressors, it weakens international norms, and ultimately, it makes large-scale conflict more likely. Now, this isn't to say that diplomacy and negotiation are inherently flawed,
Right.
but rather that they must be pursued from a position of strength and principle, with a clear understanding that concessions made to an aggressor without a corresponding commitment to upholding international law and deterring future aggression will likely backfire in the long run.
The crisis in Ukraine presents a defining moment for the international community.
Hmm.
It's a test of our collective commitment to the principles of sovereignty, territorial integrity, and the peaceful resolution of disputes. It's a test of whether we've learned from the hard lessons of history,
Yes.
or whether we're destined to repeat the tragic errors of appeasement that led to the horrors of World War II. The decisions we make now will have far-reaching consequences,
Absolutely.
shaking the future of Europe, the international order, and the very principles that underpin peace and security in the 21st century.
As we conclude this deep dive, we're left with a profound and rather unsettling question.
Hmm.
In an increasingly complex and interconnected world, how can we ensure that diplomacy prioritizes principled action over expediency,
Right.
and that the security of all nations, big or small, is truly protected?
It's a question that demands careful thought,
Yes.
robust debate, and a commitment to upholding the values and principles that form the bedrock of a just and lasting peace.
Thanks for listening to Mythos AI. Stay tuned for more concise insights. And remember to hit the like button and subscribe for future episodes.